Okay, what we'll be doing today is we're going to be covering the stabilizer for the Starduster. Um, the method we're going to use, or the materials we're going to use, are going to be the polyfiber system, which is, we'll be using polytac to adhere the covering to the frame. To treat the wood, I'm going to use some what they call poly brush, which is the salmon colored sealer that normally you would put the sealer over the covering. I'm going to use it to actually seal some of the wood, and then we're going to adhere the covering to the frame in a little different method than polyfiber wants you to do it. But we're building a model, so we can do it whatever way works best, and I feel this works best for me. So what we will do is I'll get this piece of covering cut that's going to go over this. I'm going to get this coated with some poly brush, and we'll continue on. So let me get set up. Okay, we have our covering cut to the shape or close to that of the frame of the stabilizer. So we'll put that out of the way for now. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take some poly brush and we're going to seal up the wood wherever the fabric is going to contact the frame, which would be the trailing edge, the leading edge, around the edges here, and on top of what we could call the ribs of the stab. What we're going to do is we're going to take some poly brush and we're basically just going to coat the wood so that it seals up the wood more or less. So you don't have to be super fancy. So we'll get all this coated up good. Get a good coating on here, because this is, like I said, this is actually going to seal the wood. What we will do is we will do all of the surfaces that are going to get any kind of glue on it, or glue or polytac. I call it glue. This stuff dries pretty quick. The idea of putting it on even the intermediate ribs is, once we put our covering on, we get our covering adhered to the frame really good. We're not going to, when we use the polytac, you'll see as we go along, we're only going to do the perimeter. We're not going to do anything in the middle here. But after the polytac is set and glued in and we go to shrink it, once it's shrunk and it's tight on the frame, then we're actually going to take some poly brush and brush it through the weave, and it will reactivate the glue that's on here and actually pull the weave right down onto the frame and make a very strong system. Okay, so we'll let that go now, let that dry for 5 minutes, and then we'll be back. Okay, a little bit on how polyfiber recommends you to put the covering on, and the method that I'm going to use, like I say, it is a little different, and I'm going to explain how. So, going to be using polytac to adhere the covering to the frame. The way polyfiber likes you to do it is take your polytac right out of the can, fresh, it's thick, like very thick. Take it, brush it on in a particular length, maybe 6-8 inches, and when it's still wet and still damp, push it in with your finger, and do this as you go along. As it gets here, it's dry, it dries very quickly. Now you have to hold this in place, pick this up, take your brush, dink it in, put some more on, okay, put more polytac on here, and then put this back in place, press this in with your finger, and keep going along, and do that for the whole thing. It's a system, it works, that's the recommended method to do it, so if you're doing a full-scale airplane, you have to do it that way. It's a certified system. We're building model airplanes. I don't do it that way. It's a mess. You get sticky all over the place, and it's a crummy way to do it. So the way I do it is take this, put that out of the way. We have our poly brush on here. I'm going to take polytac, put it into a little jar, and I'm going to thin it out 60-40. Everywhere that we're going to have fabric contact, not here, around the perimeter, it's going to get 2 coats of the 60-40. So let me get some mixed up, and then we'll do that. What this is going to do, this is going to allow me to get a nice coating on around the perimeter. We're not going to put it on any interior, we're just going to do around the perimeter. So I mix it up, it's about 60-40 mix. And we're going to get 2 coats on here. And what that's going to allow us to do, that's going to allow us to get the covering in place. It'll allow us to get the covering in place and tack it down in place with an iron. We aren't going to heat it to the temperature where it will shrink. We're only going to tack it in place, and that will allow us to get it taut and secured to the perimeter. This process will be used for a wing, can be used for any form of a surface that's going to take covering over a frame. I did it on the fuselage for the duster. I did it on the wings for the duster. Okay, let me get some on the edge here. Okay, this process I use glue the covering on using polyfiber. It's also the process I use the waterborne adhesive. You put the frame down, so blue screen contacts, that's what we use for and we covering. Okay, here we go. That's ready to roll. We're going to let that dry, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how we iron on the covering. Okay, so what we have now is we have our frame that's been coated with polytac all the way around the perimeter, and it's dried, and we have our covering that's already pre-cut. I'm basically gonna lay that over. Actually, we gotta flip it this way. We're a little wider down here. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take our iron. We're up to 220. I'm going low. It's not, if you watch, it won't shrink it. It's only enough to heat it up. Okay, so what I'm basically going to do is go right here. You can't see it, but we let that sit. You've now glued this covering to the frame. So what I'll do now is I'll go down here, pull this taut a little bit, do this corner. That's tacked. Go down here, do this corner, tack that. Let's see what we're going to do now. A good old third hand. Put our weight there. Pull this down here. Go right around here. We're not shrinking it, sorry. We're only heating it to 220. Just enough to make the adhesive under the covering soften up and adhere to the covering. This is much easier than trying to pick the covering up, put another layer of adhesive down. That's, like I say, that's a certified system. That's the way you have to do it when you're doing a full scale. But we're doing models, so we don't do it that way. And if you notice, being that we tacked it here and we're pulling it forward a little bit, it's nice and taut now. What I'm going to do is when I go around the corner here, we're going to pick the temperature up so it shrinks just a little bit. We don't want it to shrink too much. But because we have it tacked here and here, this can't really go anywhere. So now we'll move this out of the way, put that down there, come up here, pull this a little tight, start hitting that down there. There we go. Now pull this tight. That shrunk down there, get that iron down there. Go. Continue to go along here. Being that this is nice and straight, we can wrap this right around. Go around where the hinges are. So we wrap this right around, or at least substantially past the halfway point on the edge. Stick it. It's kind of the same way you put the SIG stick it on. So now we're pretty good there. Now what we'll do is we'll take our scissors, cut that to there. Like I say, if you have to, you could actually pick it up, but we don't want to do that. So get it ironed down. Get this cut here, because eventually we're going to wrap this around the tip. So now what we're going to do is now we're going to continue keeping this going right around. Same place. Now start to shrink at about, and we'll go to 250. There's 250. It'll take a minute to get there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put some cans here and put this here to hold this while we go around the curve. So what we're going to do here is the way I like to work the covering is when you're going around the curve, heat the covering and then move it around. Go down a little, about a ½ inch, heat the covering. Don't try to heat it and pull it because you have adhesive on here. So you're going to want to heat the covering up here and shrink it and pull it. That's going to be the process we're going to use to work it around the curve. Okay, we're getting up to 247. Okay, so that's going to be enough to give it a little bit of a shrink. We don't want to really pull it down tight. So we're going to heat the covering and work it around. And it goes right around. We only do like a ½ inch at a time. Pull it tight with your finger, heat the covering, work it around. And when you have it there, you can work that in a little bit. Once again, you can see it's tried to pull it in, pull it tight, a little heat to it, and go around. Okay, do that around the thing. Pull it, heat covering, and pull it around in place. And get them started down this way. Once you pull it, heat it, and place it down this. Up against the side here. So you'll see I'm pulling on it tight, heating it, letting the heat of the iron do the work. There you go. Come down here about 1 inch. The covering. Let it pull itself into place. Take your iron, work it back around here so it'll stick down. There we go. Go back around to here now. And over here. So you're not forcing it into place. We're going to do the same thing on the leading edge here. Come around here a little more. Pull it, heat it, press it down. Down in place. Once this is tacked down in place, we're going to take the 60-40 mixture of polytac again, and then we're going to coat over this, and it's going to soak right through. And it's going to, the mixture, if you use full strength polytac, it won't penetrate that well. It'll sit on top, but with a little bit of thinner with it, about 40%, it'll soak through and take the polytac and push it right through to the polytac on the wood, and it'll lock it right down. If you notice, I'm taking this right around so you can see where our other side is. We're going to trim it off here when we get there with a good sharp razor. I won't trim it off until we have polytac on here. The polytac, when it dries, it'll firm up the weave, the fabric, and allow you to trim it nice and neat. So there we have that. Scrap, we get that out of the way. So now what we have is we have our underside of our covering all in place. It's all tacked along here, it's tacked along here, here, and it's, if you notice, none of this here is ironed down here. We don't want that. When we shrink it, we want to be able to hold it in place and then shrink it. We're going to actually, when we shrink it, we'll actually have this side on also, but we're not going to do that for right now. So now what we're going to do is, like I said, we have this all in place. You can look at your leading edge, look at the surfaces. If it's not smooth, you see any wrinkles, take your iron and just go through. Like I said, it's up to 250 now, so it'll shrink some of the smaller wrinkles out. If you have a little wrinkles, just go over it like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our 60-40 mix. As you can see, it thinned out a little bit. I'm going to throw a little bit of MEK in there, just a smidge. That's all we need. We don't need much. Get that mixed up. The whole idea here is to have enough, you want it thin enough so it'll soak through, but you want to have enough polytac in the mix so it will maintain and keep polytac in the fabric. That's the whole idea, because the polytac is what's holding everything together. Okay. You want it to be about that consistency. Hard to explain, but you'd have to, once you do it, you'll get the gist of it. You only need one brush stroke of this to soak it in. Like I said, if you use straight thinner on this, it's not going to work right, because when you brush the thinner on here, the thinner is going to go through and soften up what's underneath, but there's not going to be anything in the weave with the exception of the thinner. And when you do it, when you mix it 60-40, it's thin enough that it'll soak through the weave and you'll still have polytac in the weave. So take our little brush that we have, nice little brush, don't need a big one, like that, and this is the quick and easy thing to do. Take your polytac, soak it up. That's all you do. You'll see it go from a nice, you'll see it go from the white color of the fabric. If you see it's kind of whitish, as soon as you hit it with the polytac, it goes clear. That's how you know you have enough on it. And then this is also going to give us a coating for our base when we go to put the other piece on. Try not to get it onto the weave in the open structure if you can. You might see a little line there, and if this is too thick, you're going to definitely see a line when you go to paint it and seal it. So thin it out enough so it soaks through. You can see it soaking in nice. Over. Believe it or not, that stuff we just put on there, that's dry already. So now, turn our iron off. Actually, we're going to turn our iron up there. Now, I'll show you how it cuts with the... It's dry, so all you're going to do is take your X-Acto blade. That's how nice it cuts. Once you, if you didn't have the poly, see, you can't cut it. It cuts and it makes a mess. But as soon as you have a little bit of poly tack on it, you can go right around. And we could use a little bit of polytac on this to make it cut a little better. Off to the side I have a little container or thinner that I always keep the brush in. Now you see I just put it on that quick. That's how nice it'll cut when you have the poly tack on the wood. And that's pretty much done. So what we would do is we would repeat the process over here. I'd put another layer of glue down on this because we already have some polytac on here. Put another layer on here, another layer on here, and 2 layers on this. And we would also make sure this is coated with some poly brush. Let it dry, then put our covering over. Being that this is the top, I would wrap it about 3/4 of the way around. Don't stop it on the trailing edge, stop it maybe on just under here a little bit. And do the same process. So now the way you shrink it is, if we had both sides covered, right now I'm at 250. Heat it very, very slow, move it around. You'll see it start to take up. I would do this side at 250, like I'm going now. Okay. 250. Flip this over. Immediately do this side at 250. Come back over. Do this side at about 270. Wait for that to warm up. Do this side at 270. Do this side at 270. 300. 300. And then make sure, you can hold it down if you want to hold it down, and make sure that you're having it flat. If you have to tweak it a little bit, tweak it a little bit. Once this is down, then what I do is, this is already on tacked here. Take poly brush, not polytac, poly brush, the pink stuff, and go here, 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 and here. Once it's ironed down to its full temperature, which I think is around 325, 330. So we got a little more to go there. Once again, I said this is 270 now. Yeah, 270. Yeah, we're at 270. I'd recommend getting a. I wouldn't recommend using a standard iron because these are digital irons, and they stay within 2 degrees the temperature, which is critical when you're doing the Ceconite covering. It's very critical. If you have the old style monocoat iron that has the dial, it varies from, it's 10-degree variance, so they're not accurate enough. I'm getting some pullback on here, but if we had the other covering on here, it would be fine. It would level it out. So, but that's what you do to cover it. That's all set to go. So the next thing we're going to do